Trading the camera lens for the writer's life, Heather Cabot's books shine a light on what happens behind the scenes to give you real, relatable stories.
You have very compelling, interesting stories. And if we're going to change this problem, if we're going to close the gender gap, the diversity gap, we need you to tell your stories.
From Geek Girl Rising, showing how women have a place at the tech table, to now, the new Chardonnay, the unlikely story of how marijuana went mainstream.
Say yes to your life.
How'd we get from this?
And when it comes to drugs and alcohol, just say no.
To
This is
this.
the fastest growing industry, arguably in the United States, arguably in the world, with now Europe opening up.
Cabot features the real stories of the industry pioneers who are at the heart of rebranding, the financial risks marijuana growers and retailers take on,
But right now, a bank that processes money, even from legal pot sales, could be charged with drug racketeering.
and what is truly behind the message for this generation. It's not just about getting stoned.
One goal,
Help people fall asleep fast and for longer.
But no buds.
No, just science.
It's an entirely new business venture. And it's big business, legal in 33 states. Is cannabis really the new Chardonnay? Leading the discussion today is Spokesman-Review reporter Kip Hill. He joins us on the other side of the screen as we welcome Heather Cabot to the virtual Northwest Passages stage.
All right, so we're here with Northwest Passages on Thursday, September 3rd, here for the Spokesman-Review. I'm with author Heather Cabot, who has just put out the book, The New Chardonnay, The Unlikely Story of How Marijuana Went Mainstream. Thanks for joining us virtually during all of this.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Kip. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm so happy that you guys arranged this. It's really wonderful that I don't have to leave my house and I can reach so many audiences. It's fantastic.
Well, that is, I guess, the advantage of all of this. And we've enjoyed
Yeah.
having a lot of different authors. And I'm really excited to talk to you because this is a subject that I've covered for the newspaper for a little while, but it's one that you bring a unique perspective to, having met so many people that work in so many levels of the cannabis industry. I guess I just kind of wanted to start with how you got involved in how did you meet the people for this book, and sort of where did the idea for it come from?
Well, I mean, so the initial idea for it really, there were a few different things that happened. So first of all, my first book, Geek Girl Rising, Inside the Sisterhood Shaking Up Tech, was about the women in the innovation economy who were advocating for a seat at the table. And there was a chapter in that book about female angel investors and venture capitalists who were investing in women-led tech startups. And right around the time that that book came out in 2017, I noticed that some of those sources for the book were starting to invest in cannabis. And I was really kind of stunned by that. I did not know anything about the cannabis industry. It was not part of my life. I always say, and I say this in the book, I mean, I grew up in the just say no generation. I'm a suburban mom of teens. It's just like the furthest thing from my life. And I was just really struck by the fact that these were people that I regarded as very straight-laced. They had these Wall Street credentials and Ivy League pedigrees. And I was just shocked that they would be investing their own money in something federally illegal. I just didn't understand that. And so, of course, I started making some calls and I started asking them, why are you doing this? What's the opportunity here? Why would you want to get involved with this? And, I had this fateful conversation with one of the very early investors in cannabis, a woman named Jean Sullivan, who's now a managing partner at ArcView. She said, listen, I can't explain this to you in a phone call. If you're really interested, you have to go to the Marijuana Business Convention in Las Vegas, which is like the largest cannabis trade show in the world and expo. And only then will you really be able to understand how professional this is, how legitimate it is, what a huge opportunity it is, and also to be able to get a sense of the kinds of people who are behind this. And so that's what I did. I went in the fall of 2017, did not know anyone, and I just went with this fresh set of eyes, trying to understand what it was all about and how we got here, frankly.
And being at that convention, and I mean, your book is full of sort of these odd sort of I guess interactions with people and people you wouldn't think that would be involved in this. And you kind of talked about that a little bit, and certainly that's been the case here in Washington. What was your first impression of that conference? Was it what you were expecting?
No, it was this Alice in Wonderland moment. It was this moment where I realized that everything that I thought I was going to see there was the complete opposite. Even though Jean told me that, I mean, I really didn't know. I mean, the one thing is, like, I didn't even understand that this was an event that was a non-consumption event. I really didn't know. I mean, it was at the Las Vegas Convention Center, and I had been there before because I had covered the Consumer Electronics Show. So I'd been to a major trade show there a couple of times. But I didn't know. And I when I walked in and I saw people, you know, in sport coats and handing out business cards, and they had their official lanyards and their swag bags, and it was just like any other trade show that I had ever been to. And so it kind of knocked me off my feet. Then, of course, when I started meeting the people and meeting some of these entrepreneurs, and I actually went to my first day, I went to this thing called the Crash Course on Weed, which is basically a one-day kind of initiation for people to understand the industry. And I just met so many different kinds of people who were there for so many different reasons. I mean, some people were there because, you know, they hadn't gotten in on the tech boom, and they, you know, were thinking this was going to be their chance to cash in. And so, you know, they were there to learn about investing. I met entrepreneurs who, of course, you know, everybody watches Shark Tank. So like everyone has this like idea that their idea is going to be the winner. So like they were there to learn about how do you actually apply for a license? How much does it cost? And so I didn't know any of those things either. So I was sitting there among all of these other newbies, kind of taking it all in. And I was just really, you know, like I said, it was this Alice in Wonderland moment where everything that I thought was the opposite, you know, in reality of what I was hearing. And then the other thing is I just didn't understand how sophisticated the industry had become, and the money. I mean, the amount of money that you have to do this legally, it really blew my mind. So, and then as I said, I mean, I was really drawn to the people and why they were there. And that's when I realized I had some really compelling material for a book.
Yeah, and the first character we sort of meet in this book is Beth, who I don't think you mentioned yet. I mean, was she the first person that you met kind of involved in this industry, and why did you decide to sort of, I mean, it's her story really. There's a story of many people, but it's her story that sort of introduces us to this industry.
So yeah, what I should say is, so at the time I was also doing, I was a contributor to Forbes, and I had been writing about women in tech for Forbes. And when I decided to start researching cannabis, I thought it would be a good idea to start maybe writing about some of the women in the space for Forbes Women. And so I was at the convention. I was actually interviewing a couple of female accountants that had, I think they had some, maybe it was an accounting firm from Denver or something. And this man walked by, and he was listening to my interview. And when it was over, he said, "Are you looking to talk to women in cannabis?" And I said, "Yeah, you know, I'm researching a book." And he said, "Well, you have to meet Beth Stavola." And I was like, "Who's Beth Stavola? I don't know who she is." And so we didn't end up meeting in person that day in Vegas, but we did end up having a phone call a few weeks later. And the minute I started talking to her about her story, and so for folks who haven't read the book, Beth is this Jersey Shore mother of 6 who had worked on Wall Street for a number of years, is married to this very sort of traditional kind of Italian husband. And you know, after the birth of her last 2 children, the birth of her twins, before the birth of her 6th child, he said, "You know, I don't want you commuting into the city anymore. I want you to stay home." So she decides to stay home. She's miserable. And she ends up deciding they meet a deal broker who encourages them to get in on the ground floor in Arizona in the medical cannabis market there. And they decide they're going to invest $1 million in the nascent market in Arizona. And so Beth is telling me this story, and along the way, she starts telling me about her attorney, who it turns out, you'll find out in the book, he's like a former Reagan era prosecutor. He's literally appointed by President Reagan to the War on Drugs Task Force. And the funny thing is, I was actually in high school living in Arizona at that time, so I grew up in Phoenix. But I mean, I didn't know who he was. You know, I was in high school. And he, in addition to that, he's also an elder in the Church of Latter-day Saints. He is an incredibly pious individual who, doesn't drink caffeine, but he ends up having this very unlikely introduction to cannabis in his own life through, you'll find out what happens with one of his children. And so I'm sitting there talking to Beth, and I realized that she's pulling in all of these aspects of the story that I wanted to tell, because the question I wanted to answer was, how did we get here? And I felt from the moment I talked to her that first time, and I mean, the other thing about Beth too is that she also represents sort of the underground industry marrying this sort of new kind of, the suits, and how that was so fraught, and why, it could be potentially perilous for an investor. And that's what happens in her story. And I just felt like she typified so much of this evolution. And just from that first phone call, I was like, I have to meet her in person. And so I did. And, over many months, I convinced her, and it was not easy, but I convinced her and convinced her family to allow me to shadow her for really now, going on 3 years.
And you mentioned those that haven't read the book. So we should mention there's a link to purchase the book if you haven't read it yet and just were interested in cannabis, or that seems weird, a picture of a bud in a wine glass. I kind of want to know what that's about. You can do that as well. And you can also send in some questions. We're getting a few questions, but before we get to those questions, I want to ask you, one of the other characters that sort of looms large in this story is Snoop Dogg himself. Did you get a chance to talk to Snoop Dogg, or how did that sort of play out?
So I really got to that part of the story through Snoop Dogg's longtime business partner and his manager, Ted Chung, who really is a main character in the book. So there's 4 main characters. There's Beth, there's Ted Chung, there's Bruce Linton, who founded Canopy Growth, and then there's Jeff, the 420 chef, who's this Julia child of weed. And, he sort of represents kind of the future of where we're going with public consumption and edibles and all of that. I didn't really think that, everybody knows Snoop, and everybody knows that Snoop is synonymous with sort of stoner culture. But I didn't think that people really knew about his team, or how, sort of him as a businessman, and really the foresight that he and his team had. I didn't think most people would know that, Snoop has a venture capital fund that is devoted to cannabis and not touching the plant. This is an investment fund that focuses on ancillary businesses. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to include Snoop and Ted, because I wanted the audience to understand, again, sort of the depth and the breadth of this industry. And I felt like through them, I could talk about software. I could talk about testing and, compliance systems and all of this sort of like unsexy stuff that really underpins the whole industry. And it's actually really critical. But I felt like through them, I could introduce the audience to that, because for me, that was a big aha. Again, I sort of was thinking like, oh, this is about people growing weed. I just did not understand the sophistication of running these, these really complicated businesses. So that was one. And then of course I wanted to talk about the influence of pop culture. So no, I did not really spend much time with Snoop at all. But I really spent a lot of time with his entourage and with all of the people that support him in the world of cannabis and all of his investments, his branded products. I had a chance to, spend a fair amount of time with the guys that run his venture capital fund. And then of course I spent time with Ted, who took me up to Canada and introduced me to Bruce Linton. And that was you were asking, how did I meet these people? That was how I met Bruce Linton. I had a meeting with Ted, and by the way, Ted was the inspiration for the whole idea of the Chardonnay moms and why the book is called The New Chardonnay. In our very first meeting, when I was just starting to research this, he was the one that said to me, that a lot of their investment thesis was around the idea that the Chardonnay moms would be the future of this industry and the future of products and product development. And I just thought that was fascinating. And as you'll see in the book, how that is sort of a thread throughout. But anyway, yeah, that's Snoop. And of course, you know, Snoop and Ted take us to Martha, and Bruce Linton takes us to Martha. And, you know, I didn't know when I met all these people that it was all going to fit together. I really didn't realize it until I sat down and started and literally like writing out a chronology for each person's character to kind of see where the intersections would be in their stories.
Yeah. It is interesting how they all sort of intertwine. And you referred to, I think, Bruce, is it Bruce that you refer to as the Willy Wonka of weed in the book?
Yes.
Yeah. And it was interesting because I pitched a story when I went and viewed one of these large scale operations that we have in Spokane Valley. And I use the exact same metaphor, that this is kind of like, you know, Wonka's factory, because it's very clean. It's very sort of, I go into one door and there's all these concoctions going on and I'm like, what is that? There's concentrates, there's all kinds of stuff. And that was the only sort of cultural language I could come up with, is that's Wonka back there making an everlasting gobstopper or something. So I found that book rather interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, so there was that, right? All of this like crazy intervention, all, you know, innovation and all these gadgets and all of that happening, and the focus groups and the taste testing and all of that. But then there's the fact that he actually founded the company in a former Hershey's factory.
Right.
That I thought was, I mean, you could not make that up. So of course, when I found out about the Hershey's factory, I said to Ted, if there's any way I can tag along with you. I mean, I didn't know if Bruce was gonna, I hadn't met Bruce, so I didn't know if he was gonna be open to letting me kind of tell his story. But I said to Ted, if there's any way that you and Snoop are going up to Smiths Falls, which is in this rural town in Ontario, it's about an hour from Ottawa. I was like, if you're going, can I tag along? Can I go with you? And so I did, and I met Bruce. And I happened to be there on a day when he was touring about 50 investors through the revamped chocolate factory, and was showing them the grow rooms and all of the vaults and the different machines to make the capsules and all of this stuff, and this, you know, this visitor center that I write about in the book. And yeah, I mean, and then I ended up interviewing him, you know, multiple times, going up to Smiths Falls a year after. And seeing through some of the construction that they had been doing, and the bottling plant that they had, the property that they had purchased across the street that was going to be for their cannabis beverages. And anyway, so yes, all of these things it all came together, but I honestly didn't know that it would till the end.
And the last person we kind of haven't talked about is Chef Jeff, and I'm going to introduce that one with a question actually from a reader, from Ellen. She asks, in writing about cannabis edibles, which you do with Chef Jeff, what was the most outrageous concoction you saw produced?
Ooh, the most outrageous concoction. It wasn't so much that it was an outrageous concoction. It's just, you know, what Jeff does, and again, this is why I wanted to include him in the book, is he's really, in many ways, he's cooking for sort of that kind of curious sort of new cannabis consumer, and all of his fare is really about microdosing. So it's not about, you know, getting exceptionally high or, you know, not being able to function. And that is the complete opposite of what he was trying to do. So, and the other thing is that he was trying to erase the taste. And so you'll find out in the book about how he's kind of like a mad scientist himself. So how he manages to do that, and all of his inventions and his contraptions that he uses to do that. I would say it wasn't so much outrageous, but in his cookbook, and this is another reason why I wanted to meet him, is he has a whole section in his cookbook. It's called The 420 Gourmet. It's published by HarperCollins. He has a whole section that's about Jewish holidays, and I'm Jewish, and I just thought it was hysterical. Like, he has a whole thing that's about Pot Shabbat and matzo ball soup and all of these sort of dishes that he grew up with. And in the book, you find out that he grew up in this Orthodox home, and he reimagines all of these recipes infused with THC and CBD. And, you know, you find out through the book about what happens with his parents, and how through them, I sort of talk about the growth of seniors and their interest in cannabis. So I don't know if it's really outrageous, but it was more just this idea of, again, the unexpected. Like, who would ever think that you would infuse matzo ball soup with THC? but he did, and he does, and he tells you how to make it. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, that's the part that interested me as well. Is he's got sort of these cuisines where, if I understand correctly, he's giving these multi-course meals where the microdosing is to the point where he was trying to make it perfect, to the point where by the end of it you feel like maybe you've had a couple glasses of wine and you're a little bit buzzed, but you could still take an Uber home and you're not overwhelmed. Which I think the collective consciousness is, based on some mainstream media reports, that if you eat a cookie real fast, you're going to get horrifically stoned. And that's not what he's trying to do, right?
No, I mean, he's really trying to make it an experience that's enjoyable and responsible. And I think that, that was always sort of where he was coming from. And I think, a lot of those incidents where we've heard about people really, having some scary reactions and dangerous reactions, where everyone knows about the Maureen Dowd piece that came out about the chocolate bar that she ate in Denver and didn't read the package. I mean, you would probably agree with me, Kip, like, this is a really new industry, and so many people along the way would say we're building the plane while flying it. That includes dosing. That includes communicating to consumers how to be safe when you use these products. And I would also add that in my conversations with people like the woman who founded Wana Brands, when I asked her, like, which is a big edibles company that I think you may have the products, I think, in Washington. I think you do, but it's one of the largest edibles companies in the country that's been able to actually license her products in many, many states. But when we talked about, like I said, well, what's kind of the next frontier? And she said, it's really, it's the people that are going to create reliable experiences, and so that people and consistent experiences, so people know what they're getting. Like, basically, because it's been around for so long, how you're going to feel if you have a glass of wine or if you have a beer. I mean, you have a sense, most people have a sense, who are over 21 and have been drinking responsibly. They kind of know how they're going to feel. But that's not really the case with these very new products. People don't know, and as you know, there's a delay in how long they take to actually kick in, which is why when Jeff does his events, they're multi-course meals over a couple of hours, so that you might be getting, say, 2 milligrams with your appetizer, and 2 milligrams, in your salad dressing, and 2 milligrams with your entree, and then 2 milligrams with your dessert, so that by the end it's sort of this layering effect. And that's why he's been recognized for that idea of doing it in a very sophisticated, kind of a gourmet way. But I think that I think we have a long way to go in terms of educating consumers about how to use these products. I mean, I don't know how it is in Washington, but what would you say about that in terms of where you are?
Well, I think in your book clearly points out that there's just not a lot of research out there, and that's kind of what I've been covering from my perspective. Is we just don't know. There have been efforts to be able to grow more strains that will be allowed to be researched, and with more research, we'll know more about the effects and all that kind of stuff. But as you note in the book, and we've noted in reporting, there's only one college, one university in the United States that's allowed to grow this for pharmaceutical grade type of research. So we don't have that out there. It's I think in Washington, what I'd say, and I think you touch on this a little bit in the book, but the thing that I keep hearing from retail shop owners and growers is there's this race to have the highest potency THC at the lowest possible price, is kind of what we've seen in Washington State. Is that what you experience? Is that what people are kind of chasing in other states? Because I know Washington's a little bit separated because of its specific laws that require, you can't have what you call vertical scaling or anything. Retailers can't have interest in producers and processors, and we can't have owners from outside of our state. So it's a little bit insulated. So I didn't know sort of what you experienced. There's a couple points there, but in answer to
I was just going to say, just to go back to the potency issue,
Yeah.
I'll say, as you know, as somebody who's not a cannabis consumer and who, you know, was coming at this with really no knowledge at all, other than like what I'd seen in the media, you know, or again, just say no. I mean, I really didn't know anything about consumption. I did not understand this whole idea of concentrates. And I think to understand this potency question, you really have to understand that there are all of these derivatives that are made from the plant, that oil that comes from the plant, which is essentially isolating THC, you know, it's isolating or CBD, but isolating the most potent chemicals that we know about that exist in the plant, and then reformulating them into an array of products. And some of those products are incredibly potent. You know, when we talk about concentrates that are made into, you know, waxes for dabbing, and, you know, they have all different names, but I did not know about that. And I will say another reason why I chose to follow Beth in the book is because a big part of her success was this proprietary method of being able to extract the oils from cannabis and turn them into these different products, which is why her company was called MPX, Melting Point Extracts. And I actually got a chance to like meet like the guy that pioneered, like the chemist that taught himself how to do all this. I actually met him. It was like a Breaking Bad moment. It was kind of funny. I mean, I just happened to be there and he was there that day and I got to meet him. But, you know, as a consumer and somebody who's outside the industry, I didn't make the distinction. And I think that's really important when we talk about, again, like consumer education. I don't think that people really understand the range of products. I don't think they understand how they're made. And the last point I'll say on that is that, you know, in Colorado, and I'm sure this is the case in Washington, but they, you know, the state reports to the legislature every year with how the industry is doing. And their Healthy Kids report came out a couple of weeks ago. And typically they've seen either a sort of a decrease or the use among teens are staying pretty much stable. What they saw this year was that's true, except among kids who are dabbing and vaping. So kids who are using these high potency products. That stuck out to me as a parent. And again, thinking like, you know, people don't necessarily understand the whole range of products. And I think there are people in the industry who would say, particularly for medical patients, there are some people who are in such chronic pain or they have certain ailments that they need that high potency. But I agree with you. I don't think that there's been enough research to really understand what the impact of those products can be and the different strains and how, you know, it's not just sort of the biomass, like the organic material, it's how it's processed and what they make it into. And I think that's kind of what I was trying to get to in the book too. I was trying to give people a sense of that because I don't think a lot of people in, you know, like me, people kind of in the mainstream even understand those products. I mean, would you agree on that?
Oh, I think so. I think there's also a discerning, you know, clientele out there now that know because it's been so ubiquitous in Washington State. I mean, we've had shops open for 6 years now. They know kind of what strains they're looking for.
Right.
But we also have those bud tenders that you walk in and they say, what are you looking for? Do you want to get high? Do you want to go out and do yard work? Do you want to listen to music? What do you want to do? And so you have that kind of expertise as well. I wanted to ask, you know, the book's subtitle is How Marijuana Went Mainstream. And I think it is to a certain extent, but I think it also has a little bit of a stigma. And certainly there are states that still don't allow this. We have an interesting situation in Washington where you have, and we live in Spokane, which is on the eastern side of Washington. So we're right up against the border. You have shops that are, you know, 5 miles from the border, and then you go over the border. And I was talking actually even to an attorney yesterday who does criminal defense of this. And he says, you need to remember that once you do that, you cross the border if you purchase it in Washington, which you're not supposed to do. But once you do that, you are playing with federal law, and federal law enforcement can come after you. So what is that really, is an act of Congress what's keeping this from finally going fully mainstream? Not to say that the subtitle of the book isn't accurate, but I think there's still some steps to be taken. What do you think about that?
Oh, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think this is just the beginning. I think I just wanted to give people a survey of the different ways that it is going mainstream. But I fully agree. I mean, there is definitely still a stigma that's out there. I mean, I experience it even when I tell people about what I was writing about. I mean, even when I told my kids that this is what I was writing about, they didn't want me to tell anyone. They were mortified when I sold the book. They were like, "Do not tell anyone you're working on
They
this."
weren't
So
proud that their mom was on the cutting edge of cannabis research?
no, I'll tell you, they are proud now because
Okay.
when I started talking to them about criminal justice reform and systemic racism, which you know is a thread of the book as well, and how that relates to drug policy and drug enforcement, they really got interested. And I think that for them, if you ask them what the book is about, they'll say it's about criminal justice reform, because that was really what resonated with them. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, look, I think we can agree that certainly during COVID, the fact that you had states declaring cannabis businesses essential, that was a huge step forward in terms of validating, legitimizing the industry at 100%. I think the fact that you have certainly in the Democratic primary on the debate stage, you had multiple times, you had discussions about marijuana legalization. That's never happened before. You know, I feel like this was a turning point where when that's happening in prime time, something is shifting. I think, what is it going to take? You know, this is going to sound kind of wonky, but I think a big part of it is the banking reform that's been held up on the Hill. Which, for those of you out there who haven't been following it, there is some legislation in Congress that has been passed by the House. It's been held up by the Senate. It was part of the stimulus package that still hasn't gotten passed. I'm not sure where it stands now, but essentially what this would do was open up banking to the cannabis industry in states where it's legal. Why is this important? One, and I'm not sure what the situation is in Washington. I know in Denver they have some credit unions that do allow banking, but in much of the country, cannabis is totally unbanked. So it's a cash business, which invites crime, which, you know, I think takes away from the legitimacy of it. And then the other part of it, which is important to me, is that it also cuts out a whole group of people who don't have millions of dollars at their disposal to start these businesses and run these businesses. And I'm talking about, you know, Black and brown founders, women, veterans, but in particular, people of color, you know, who were disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, and in many parts of the country are not able to cash in. They're not able to get even a toehold in this industry because they can't get loans. They can't get small business loans. They can't get loans from their local bank because it remains, it's federally illegal. And so these banking, you know, if these banking provisions ultimately pass, and I think there's, you know, depending on what happens in the election, even if it doesn't happen now, I think there's a feeling that there is momentum behind that. But that, I think, will go a long way to opening up these businesses even more. And then, let's look at what's happening in November, right? We have Arizona's voting on adult use. You have New Jersey voting on adult use, which many people believe will force New York and Connecticut. The governor of Pennsylvania last week talked about legalizing adult use as a way to boost the economy. So governors are talking about this. So I think that I think the political will is there, certainly at the state level. And I think it's just a matter of time. And, you know, and for your audience out there, you know, there has been movement around not just banking, but decriminalization in general on Capitol Hill. And the whole full House is going to be taking up the MORE Act, which would decriminalize marijuana, and more importantly, would lead to a process to expunge marijuana offenses, low-level marijuana offenses. So I think the momentum is there. Is it totally mainstream? No, no, it's getting there, and that's kind of what I was trying to show, is, you know, sort of how it was getting there. But I think we're still some time away, away from it being fully accepted.
I'm really glad you brought up the banking bill, because for people that may be watching this and don't really follow all of that legislative stuff that's been going on, that's actually, you mentioned that the Senate is sort of been the stumbling block there. It's actually one of our senators in Idaho, Mike Crapo, who's the chairman of the banking committee, who put out a lot of these concerns that he had about taking up this legislation and all that kind of stuff. Of course, it was pre-COVID, and haven't had a chance to talk to him since that point. But we also had Republicans here in Washington State who you might not think would be in favor of any type of legalization or anything like that. Sorry.
That's okay.
Who might think, who might be opposed to that, actually coming out and saying, no, in fact, we want this type of legislation because it's safer for our lending institutions.
Communities. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, look, everyone, we're going to see what the impact of COVID is going to be. We know, you look across the country, people are unemployed. Tax revenue is just down. I mean, it's just, I think that cities and localities around the country are trying to figure out how are they going to plug these budget holes? How are they going to put people back to work? I think also they're looking at the polling around cannabis, which shows that, multiple polls, 2/3 of Americans are in favor of legalization. So I given the situation and the fact that these businesses were declared essential during this time, a few years ago, I would have been surprised about the Republicans that, are saying, but I'm not now. I mean, I make the point in the book, when you see, former Speaker of the House, John Boehner, join the board of one of the largest multi-state cannabis operators in the US, the guy who said he was unalterably opposed to marijuana, and now he's on the board of this company. When that happened in 2018, I was like, okay, something is happening here. So I think we're going to continue to see that. But I would have been surprised a few years ago, for sure, before I started reporting on this.
Yeah. I really appreciate the time. We've gone about a half hour now, and I'm checking some of the other questions that we have. And thank you for, again, when you've, I know we were a little bit tardy this afternoon with some technical hiccups and all that kind of stuff. There is a link to purchase the book. And for those, I have read it and I appreciate it. Yeah, there you go. You got a copy right there. Even as somebody that has covered this in Washington State, continuing to learn things and learn that other states are having some of the same sort of stumbling blocks that we did in Washington State was one of the other major things that I picked up in your book. Give me just sort of, we've been pitching it kind of this whole time, but for somebody that, is watching this thinking, I don't want to read a book about marijuana, it's not really my thing. Why should they read this particular book?
Well, the new Chardonnay is really a book about entrepreneurship, and it just happens to be about cannabis, and it happens to be about people who with these Shark Tank dreams who see either a problem they want to solve, or they have a passion for a particular type of business they want to build, and they're going for it. And they are going for it and taking the most, truly, more risk than I think the average entrepreneur takes on. And entrepreneurs take on a lot of risk. And, I mostly write about startups and entrepreneurship. And what really drew me to this topic was these people who were risking not only their finances, their reputations, but in some cases, even their freedom to build these businesses. And so this is really it's just kind of a wild tale. It takes you inside a world that most people don't know anything about, and introduces you to these very compelling characters who are wild and wacky, and it just takes you on a wild ride. And what I really wanted to do with this book, more than anything, I wanted to challenge myself to write it like a true narrative. I wanted it to be a page turner, and I wanted it to be almost like a novel. I wanted it to feel like a beach read. And so as I was thinking about which characters I wanted to follow, that was in the back of my mind too. How was I sort of going to cast this so that I could throw in all of the historical and political and the business aspects of this story, but in a way that's like really fun and interesting and makes you want to keep reading. So for people out there that don't care about cannabis at all, it's sort of, I guess the comparison I would make would be to like anything about, like Breaking Bad. Okay, that's a perfect example, which, was an amazing show. And, you don't have to care about the drug trade to find those characters super compelling. And that's what I was hoping to do. That was what I was aspiring to do with the new Chardonnay. So I hope that I achieved it. So far, it's getting some good, it's getting good reviews. But that was my idea, was to just write a super fun book that you just couldn't put down.
Well, I got to say, I finished it in a few days myself, and like I said, I had a little bit of a background in it, so I kind of knew where you were going with a few of the things.
Yeah.
But even I would agree, even if you have no interest or haven't read any of the Spokesman's coverage, which you should go ahead and do, because I write quite a few stories about that. But if you haven't done that and are interested in this, in sort of a immediate sort of introduction to this topic, Heather writes in a way that I think it brings you in, and also sort of explains some of these complicated topics in a really lucid and I think enjoyable way. So, and I mean that.
Thank you so much. That means so much to me, because that was my goal, and I'm sure, as a reporter, when you're covering stories that are really nuanced and are complicated. I mean, this is complicated. This is business, it's science, it's politics, it's medicine, it's social justice. It's all of these really complicated, meaty topics. I knew that my challenge would be to find those storylines and find characters through which I could address all of those things, but in a way that was digestible. It was a way that felt accessible to people and fun. So I really appreciate you saying that. I wanted people to learn something, but I also wanted them to get excited about where these characters were going, or be on the edge of their seat when they didn't know if it was going to go. And that's what just back to the point about entrepreneurship. I mean, this is why I love writing about entrepreneurs, is they have to be so comfortable with uncertainty and risk. And I think there are a lot of really universal aspects of this book that people can take away and apply to any business. Because it's really a look under the hood at business and what makes businesses work. And these characters definitely have mess ups. I mean, they definitely, I think, in a lot of ways, embody what we see in the tech world, failing fast. They have to pivot. They have to figure out quickly how to navigate things that they didn't expect happening. So that's why I feel like, it would appeal to anybody. I mean, one of the people that endorsed the book is Damon John from Shark Tank, because of the entrepreneurship aspect of the book.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate you having on. Sorry, I'm a reporter, so I'm getting phone calls. And
hey, I understand.
As I go here.
I understand.
So I appreciate that. Any parting words you have for our audience about the book or anything, Heather? Otherwise, we really appreciate having you on.
Thank you so much. Well, it was truly, it's a privilege to speak with you. I love being interviewed by another reporter who understands. Honestly, it's like, I happen to be married to somebody who is also, he works in the news business and, was a journalist for many years. And it's really cool to talk to somebody who understands, how much work it is to put together this type of a project, and, the passion that you have to have for it to really get it done. So I really appreciate you speaking with me tonight, and for the newspaper and Aunties and Northwest Book Passages for hosting me and being interested in the new Chardonnay. And I encourage anybody out there to take a look, and also let you know that I also have a podcast as well called The New Chardonnay, which is about cannabis, but it's also about reinvention and about entrepreneurs and thought leaders who are on the cutting edge of change. So, which is something that I'm really fascinated by. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and again, the book is The New Chardonnay. I have my own copy right here. So
The New Chardonnay.
Thank you so much for being on, Heather. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us today. All of our videos and discussions are archived on our video site, which you can access for free. If you feel compelled to buy a ticket, please take that cash and instead make a contribution to the Community Journalism and Civic Engagement Fund via the Inovia Foundation. We appreciate your support. Welcome to today's virtual Northwest Passages Forum.